Opening, the year that ran itself. Most people do not choose the life they are living. They inherit it. A job taken because it was there. A rhythm adopted because everyone else had one. A set of priorities absorbed from parents, from culture, from the loudest voice in the room. Then years pass, and one morning you notice the life is full, but it is not yours. It is a life that happened to you while you were busy being competent inside it. This audiobook is about the moment of noticing and what to do next. The noticing often arrives quietly. Not a crisis, just a Tuesday where you realize you cannot name the last thing you did because you wanted to. The calendar is full. The obligations are met. The appearances are maintained. And underneath a low, persistent hum of wrongness, not despair, just the sense that the life is slightly tilted, like a picture frame you keep meaning to straighten and never do. That tilt is the subject of this book. It is not failure. It is drift, and drift is fixable precisely because it is not a fall. It is a direction you stop choosing. We will use a method called the align method. Acknowledge the drift. Locate your true priorities. Inspect the actual use of time. Give up borrowed goals. Nudge one thing toward fit. 5 moves, none of them requiring you to burn the life down and start from zero, because the point is not destruction, it is correction. A life that fits is not built by dramatic upheaval. It is built by small, honest adjustments made by someone who has finally looked at where they are. One boundary, stated plainly. This is a practical companion for living more deliberately, written by someone who believes ordinary people can steer their own lives. It is not therapy, and it does not pretend to be. If the drift sits beside real depression, anxiety, or a life you cannot function inside, that deserves care from people trained to give it, and reaching for that care is not a failure of the method. It is the correct first move. For the rest of us, the competent, the busy, the quietly misaligned, the work is simpler and harder at once. Look at the life, tell the truth about it, and adjust it until it fits the person actually living it. Chapter 1: The Quiet Drift. Drift is not a dramatic thing. It is the small, cumulative effect of 1,000 unexamined yeses. You say yes to the meeting because it is easier than the conversation about bandwidth. You keep the commitment because you made it a year ago and your identity is someone who follows through. You stay on the path because the path was already cut, and cutting a new one requires a decision you keep postponing. None of these is wrong in the moment. Together, they become a life you did not steer. The dangerous part of drift is that it feels like motion. You are busy, productive, needed, and busyness disguises the fact that the motion is someone else's direction. A boat with no rudder still moves, carried by current and wind, and the movement feels like progress because the scenery changes. But progress is not the same as direction. The drifting person is not lazy. They are mobile without a heading. And mobility without a heading is exactly how you arrive somewhere you never meant to be, on time and exhausted. The first act of alignment is simply to notice the rudder is missing. Most people have never paused long enough to ask whether the direction is theirs. They assume the busyness is the life, and the life is fine, because fine is the story you tell to avoid the harder question of whether it fits. Acknowledging the drift is not an admission of failure. It is the most basic act of ownership. I have been carried, and now I will look at where, and looking is the moment the steering begins, because you cannot correct a heading you have not named. This chapter asks one thing: stop confusing movement with direction. The full calendar is not evidence of a chosen life. It is evidence of a filled one. The two are different, and the difference is the whole of the drift. You will not fix what you have not named, and naming begins with the honest sentence most people avoid. Much of my life is happening to me, and I would struggle to say where it is going. That sentence is not defeat. It is the starting point of every life that ever got steered, because the steering starts the moment someone admits they have not been holding the rudder, and decides, finally, to take it. Chapter 2: How Lives Slip Off Course. Lives do not fall off course in one decision. They lean slowly, the way a photograph tilts a degree at a time until it is obviously crooked and you cannot remember when it moved. The leaning happens at the joints, The small choices where you trade a true want for a convenient one, a long value for a short comfort, a stated priority for an unstated expectation you absorbed without questioning. Each trade is tiny. The sum is a life pointing somewhere you did not intend. Three forces do most of the leaning. The first is momentum. You did it last year, so you do it this year, and the repetition hardens into identity. I'm the person who always does X, and identity is the hardest thing to question, because questioning it feels like ceasing to be good. The second is accommodation. You adjust to other people's needs so often that your own quietly disappear, and the disappearance feels like maturity rather than loss. The third is avoidance. You fill the days with the urgent so you never sit with the important, because the important requires a decision you are not ready to make, and busyness is the most respectable form of postponement there is. The leaning is invisible from inside it, because you are moving and movement feels like progress. It is visible only from a step back, the audit, the pause, the honest look. And the look is precisely what the leaning is designed to prevent, because a person who pauses might notice the tilt, and noticing threatens the whole comfortable structure. So the drift protects itself with more motion, and the misaligned person becomes more busy, more competent, more exhausted, and no closer to asking the only question that would help. Is this life pointed where I want to go? The relief of naming the forces is that they are not fate. Momentum can be interrupted by a single deliberate no. Accommodation can be balanced by a single reclaimed want. Avoidance can be met by a single scheduled hour with the important. None of these requires upheaval. They require attention, and attention is the one resource the drift has been spending for you. This chapter is the step back. From here, the tilt is visible, and a visible tilt is correctable, because you cannot steer a life you are living from inside the blur. But from a step back, with the picture finally straight in view, the rudder is within reach, and reaching for it is the whole of the method. Chapter 3: The Borrowed Life. A great deal of drift is borrowed. You are pursuing goals you never chose, the salary milestone someone else named impressive, the milestone of marriage by 30 because the culture whispered it, the house that proves you arrived, the schedule that looks like a successful person's schedule. These are not wrong in themselves. They are wrong as defaults, because a default you never questioned is not a goal. It is a borrowed goal, and borrowed goals are the heaviest kind of drift, because they look like ambition while quietly being someone else's ambition wearing your face. The borrowed life is convincing because it is rewarded. People nod at the milestones. The promotion, the property, the picture, they earn approval, and approval feels like correctness. So you keep climbing a ladder leaning against a wall you did not choose, and the climbing is praised, which makes the questioning feel like ingratitude. But praise for the borrowed goal is praise for the performance of a life, not the living of one, and a life performed for approval is, by definition, not fitted to the person performing it. Locating the borrowed goals is like holding your possessions up to the light. Which of these did I actually want, and which did I inherit? The inherited ones are not shameful. They are understandable. You absorb them from loving parents, from a culture that equates worth with output, from peers whose direction you mistook for your own. But understanding is not the same as keeping. A borrowed goal can be returned gently by admitting it was never quite yours, and the return is not a rejection of ambition. It is the recovery of it, because true ambition is the thing you want when no one is watching, and the borrowed goal has been standing in front of it. The chapter is not a call to abandon everything. Some borrowed goals turn out to be yours once you examine them. You do want the house, for reasons that are actually yours, and the examination only deepens the want. The point is the examination, not the discard. The drifting person cannot say which goals are theirs, because they have never separated the two. The aligning person can, because they held each one to the light, and the holding is what turns a borrowed life into a chosen one. You are allowed your wants. You are only not allowed to mistake everyone else's for your own, and the mistaking is the drift, and the distinguishing is the steer. Chapter 4: When Busy Becomes a Hiding Place. Busyness is the most respectable hiding place there is. No one questions a busy person. Busy is virtuous, productive, necessary, and that is exactly why it works as a refuge from the questions you do not want to ask. As long as the day is full, you cannot hear the quiet wrongness underneath, because the noise of the full day drowns it out, and the drowning feels like a full life, when it is actually an avoidance with a calendar. The hiding works because it is partially true. The tasks are real. The deadlines exist. The people depending on you are genuine. So the busyness is not a lie, it is a truth used to avoid a deeper truth, which is that amid the real tasks, you have not looked at whether the life containing them fits you. The avoidance is not the work. It is the refusal to step back from the work long enough to ask where it is going. And the refusal, wrapped in the work, is invisible even to you, because you are, after all, being useful, and useful is the last word anyone would use to describe someone hiding. Notice the pattern. When the important question arises, the busy person reaches for the urgent. A hard look at the marriage. There is an email, a reckoning with the career. There is a meeting, a decision about the life. There is a task, any task, and the task is the shield. The shield is effective, which is the problem because it keeps the question unanswered and the drift uninterrupted, and the drift, uninterrupted, becomes a life, and the life, though full, is the one you were hiding from building on purpose. The cure is not less work. It is a scheduled encounter with the question. The audit, a fixed, defended hour where the tasks are set down and the direction is examined, is the only thing that breaks the hiding, because the hiding relies on the absence of the look. Give yourself the hour, protected like a meeting with someone important, because the someone is you, and the you who has been hidden under the busyness deserves the appointment. Busyness is not the enemy of a fitted life. Avoidance wearing busyness is, and the defended hour is how you take the costume off, and under it is the person who can finally steer, because the steering requires the look, and the look requires the stillness, and the stillness is what the busyness was built to prevent. Chapter 5. The difference between tired and misaligned. There is a tiredness that rest does not fix, and most people misdiagnose it as mere fatigue. They sleep more, take the vacation, book the massage, and return to the life still wearing the weariness, because the weariness was never physical. It was misalignment, the cost of living a life pointed slightly away from the person inside it, a cost paid in a low, constant friction that no pillow removes. Signal is specific. You are not burnt out in the dramatic sense. You are capable, functional, even successful, and yet a background resentment hums not at anyone at the shape of the days. The tasks get done. The doing feels like wearing clothes a size too small. That is misalignment, and it is different from ordinary tiredness in one key way. Ordinary tiredness is solved by stopping, and misalignment is not, because stopping only pauses a life that is still, underneath, pointed the wrong way. The rest helps the body and leaves the friction, and the returning friction is the tell. Separating the two matters because the treatments differ. Tiredness needs recovery. Misalignment needs redirection. A person who treats misalignment with vacation will feel better for a week and worse after, because the week off proved the problem was not the hours but the heading, and the heading, untouched, reasserts itself the moment the luggage is unpacked. The audit is the redirection. Not more rest, but an honest look at where the life points, and an adjustment of the point, because a life pointed at your actual values does not produce the friction, no matter how full, and a life pointed away produces it, no matter how rested. Practice the distinction on your own weariness. After rest, does the friction return? If yes, the problem is not the pace, it is the fit, and no amount of pace fixing will help. If the friction is gone after real rest, it was fatigue, and you are aligned but overworked, which is a simpler fix. Most quiet drift is misalignment mislabeled as tiredness, and the mislabel is why people keep booking vacations that do not work. The honest read, "This is not tired. This is pointed wrong," is the uncomfortable gift, because it points not to a pillow but to a rudder, and the rudder taken is the only thing that ends the friction that rest could never touch, and the touching of it is the beginning of a life that fits. Chapter 6. What you actually want beneath the noise. Beneath the borrowed goals and the noise of should, there is a quieter want, the thing you would choose if no one were watching and no one would know. Finding it is not easy, because the noise is loud and the quiet want speaks in a small voice that years of accommodation have trained you to ignore. But it is there, and it is the compass for the whole audit, because a life that fits is simply a life pointed at this want, and everything else is adjustment toward it. The noise comes from three directions: the should voice, what a person like you is supposed to want; the comparison voice, what others have, which becomes what you must have to be safe or worthy; the fear voice, what you want but are afraid to name because naming it makes it real and real makes it losable. The three voices crowd out the small one, and the small one, unheard, becomes a vague dissatisfaction you cannot locate, which is the hum of the drift, and the hum is the signal that the quiet want is still there, unspoken, unpaid attention. Recovering the want requires silence and honesty, both uncomfortable. Silence because the noise fills any gap. Honesty because the want once named may disappoint the people whose borrowed goals you have been carrying, and disappointing them is the fear that kept the want silent. But the want is yours, and a life built on a want you will not name is a life built on a lie you tell for others. And the lie, though loving in intent, is the misalignment, and the misalignment is the cost. Naming the want is not selfish. It is the prerequisite of a life that fits, because you cannot steer toward a destination you refuse to say out loud. The want is usually simpler than the borrowed goals. Not the mansion but the unhurried evening. Not the title but the work that absorbs you. Not the impressive life but the present one, present to the people and the tasks, and the quiet that the impressive life crowds out. The audit clears the noise so the simple want can surface, and the surfacing is the compass. From here, every borrowed goal can be measured against it. Does this point toward the want or away from it? The measuring is the steering, and the steering, repeated, is a life that fits, built not on what you should want but on what you do, and the do is the only want that was ever yours to live. Chapter 7. The Audit of Time. Time is the first ledger of a life, because where time actually goes is where the life actually is, regardless of what you say you value. Everyone claims family is the priority and spend their hours in the inbox. Everyone says health matters and cancels the walk. The gap between stated value and spent time is not hypocrisy. It is drift made visible, and the audit of time is simply the honest accounting of that gap, without shame and without excuse. Run the audit concretely. For 1 week, note where the hours go, not broadly, specifically. The scroll, the meeting that could have been an email, the commute spent in dread, the evening spent numb in front of something. Then list your stated priorities. Hold the two side by side. The distance between them is the drift, quantified, and quantifying it is the first time the drift becomes a thing you can see rather than a feeling you carry. A feeling of wrongness is vague and endless. A ledger of hours is specific and adjustable, and specific is what lets you act. The point is not to criminalize the scroll or the rest. Rest is a priority too, and the audit often reveals that the rest you got was the wrong kind, numb, not renewed, because it was stolen from the time meant for the things you value, leaving both the value unmet and the rest unsatisfying. The audit lets you trade the numb rest for renewed rest and the value-met hours, because the enemy is not leisure. The enemy is the unexamined time that serves neither, the dead hours that drift away and leave the ledger full of motion and empty of direction. Close the gap in small, real ways. Not a revolution of the schedule, a nudge. 1 hour a week moved from the numb to the value. The hour defended is the rudder move, because it is a choice about where the life goes, made by the person living it, and one chosen hour is the crack in the drift. The audit of time is not a productivity sermon. It is the honest mirror, and the mirror, though unflattering, is kinder than the alternative, because a life you can see is a life you can steer, and a life you cannot see is a life the current runs, and the running is the drift, and the steering is the hour moved on purpose toward the want by you. Chapter 8. The Audit of Energy. Time is not the only ledger. Energy is the second, and it is the one people ignore because you can spend an hour and lose nothing, or spend an hour and lose the day. Energy, the actual aliveness you bring to things, is where the fit really shows, because a life that fits generates energy, and a life that does not spends it. And the spending is why the misaligned person is tired at the end of a day they were technically free to enjoy. Audit energy the way you audited time. Through a week, note what gives and what takes, the conversation that leaves you lit, the meeting that leaves you drained, the task that absorbs you so the hour vanishes, the task that you approach like a wall, the people who return you to yourself, the people who subtly extract you from yourself. The pattern is the audit, and the pattern seen is the map of the fit, because energy, unlike time, does not lie about what matters to you. Time can be spent on obligation. Energy is spent only where something in you responds, and the response is the truest signal of fit you have. The finding is usually that a few things take far more than they give, and a few give far more than they take, and the drift has the ratio backwards. The takers are funded by the givers, and the givers are starved. The misaligned life overfunds the takers, the draining job, the extracting relationship, the obligation performed for approval, and it starves the givers. The absorbing work, the returning friend, the quiet that renews. The audit of energy is the rebalancing, and the rebalancing is not luxury. It is maintenance, because a life that spends more than it generates is a life running on reserve, and reserve, unlike a bank's, does not refill on its own. Protect the givers the way you would protect a source of water in a dry place, because they are exactly that, the source from which the aligned life is built. Defend one giver this week, the friend, the walk, the work that absorbs, the silence that renews, and starve one taker a little, the meeting that could be skipped, the obligation performed only for show, the person whose company costs you yourself. The nudges are the steering, and the steering repeated turns a life that drains into a life that generates, and a generating life is, by definition, a life that fits, because fit is not comfort. Fit is the right energy moving in the right direction, and the direction, chosen by you, is the whole of the alignment, and the alignment is the quiet that replaces the hum. Chapter 9. The Audit of Relationships. Relationships are the third ledger, and the most tender, because the people in your life are not ledger entries. They are persons, loved, and the audit here is not a cold accounting but an honest look at which relationships return you to yourself, and which quietly extract you from it. The drifting person often keeps company that costs them their own self, and calls the cost loyalty, and the calling is the misalignment wearing the clothes of love. Two patterns dominate. The first is the extracting relationship, the person whose presence leaves you smaller, whose needs always precede yours, whose regard is earned by the erasure of your want. This is not always malice. Often it is two misaligned people, one of whom learned to take and one of whom learned to disappear, and the dance is old and mutual. The second is the returning relationship, the person with whom you are more yourself, not less, whose company generates rather than spends. The audit sorts these not by worth but by effect, because the effect is what determines whether the relationship fits the life you are trying to build. The audit does not say abandon the extractor. It says see the cost and decide consciously whether the relationship is worth it, and if it is, carry the cost with eyes open rather than by reflex, and if it is not, loosen it with the same care you would use with any structural weight. The returning relationships, meanwhile, are to be defended like sources of water, because they are the givers in your energy ledger, and a life that fits is built around them, not in spite of them. The point is choice. Most drifting people relate by default, and default relating is how you end up surrounded by people who fit a life you did not choose. Practice the honest sort. Name privately the 3 people who return you to yourself and the 3 who extract. Then ask, am I defending the first 3 or letting them slip while I fund the second 3? The drift usually has the order backwards because the extractors are often the loud, The urgent, the needing, and the returning are the quiet, the present, the easy to neglect. The audit corrects the order, not by cutting people out, but by directing your scarce, precious attention toward those who fit the life. And attention directed is attention steered, and steered attention is the beginning of relationships that fit, which is the beginning of a life that does, because the life is, in large part, the company it keeps, and the keeping, done on purpose, is the alignment. Chapter 10. The Audit of Obligations. Obligations are the fourth ledger and the heaviest, because obligations feel like duty, and duty feels like identity, and identity feels like fate. But not all obligation is yours. Some you chose, some you inherited, some you accepted once and never revisited, and the never revisited is where the drift hides, because an obligation unexamined for years is not a duty. It is a habit wearing the clothes of honor, and habits are the quiet architects of the misaligned life. Run the obligation audit. List what you are committed to, the role, the promise, the standing yes, and mark each, chosen, inherited, or expired. The chosen ones are yours and they matter, hold them well. The inherited ones were given by family, culture, a younger self who is not you now, question them. The expired ones were real once, a commitment to a project, a role, a person's need, but the need ended and the commitment did not, release them. Most drifting people carry a backpack of expired obligations, heavy precisely because they are no longer serving anyone, only the habit of keeping them, and the habit is the weight. The fear under the audit is that releasing an obligation is a failure of character, but an obligation you no longer owe is not a duty you abandoned. It is a weight you were carrying past its time, and carrying past its time is not virtue. It is clutter. And clutter in the obligation ledger is what keeps you too full to hold the things that actually fit. The audit is the emptying of the expired, not the abandonment of the real, and the distinction is the whole of the integrity. You keep your word where it is live, and you release it where it is dead, and both are honorable, because honor is in the truth of the commitment, not in the dragging of its corpse. Close the ledger by one release and one defense. Release one expired obligation, the thing you keep from guilt or inertia, not from live duty. Defend one chosen obligation, the thing that is actually yours, held well without apology because it fits. The two moves are the steering, because the release frees energy for the fit and the defense confirms it, and together they turn the obligation ledger from a weight into a structure, and a structured life is a steered one. The drift filled the ledger with the unexamined. The audit clears it with the honest, and the honest ledger is light enough to carry a lifetime, because it contains only what is live, and live obligation bounded is not the exhaustion. The expired pile was, and the pile, set down, is the room where the fitted life begins. Chapter 11. Letting go of borrowed goals. Letting go of a borrowed goal is harder than adopting it, because the letting go feels like failure. You wanted the milestone, or your people wanted it, or the culture insisted, and stepping back from it reads internally as quitting, when it is actually the opposite. Quitting the borrowed is the first honest claim on the real. The discomfort of the release is not the signal you are wrong. It is the signal the identity is resisting change, and identity resists change even when the change is freedom. The release is practical, not dramatic. You do not announce to the world that you are abandoning its milestones. You simply stop funding the borrowed goal with your energy and redirect that energy toward the want beneath the noise. The promotion you never wanted becomes a job you do well without the climb. The house you never needed becomes a rental you like. The timeline you never chose loosens, and the loosening is not collapse. It is correction. And correction stings the identity precisely because the identity was built on the borrowed, and the sting is the old self objecting to the new, and the objection is not truth. It is withdrawal. Expect resistance from the environment. The people who benefited from your borrowing, who admired the milestone, who leaned on your climbing, who measured you by the borrowed scale, will question the step back, and their questioning is the borrowed life protecting itself through them. Hold the release with warmth. You are not rejecting them. You are reclaiming you, and the reclaiming, though it disappoints the borrowed scale people, is the only move that fits, and the fit, once felt, makes the disappointment survivable, because a life that fits is worth more than the approval of people measuring you by a scale you never chose. The gift of the release is not emptiness but room. The energy that was funding the borrowed goal returns, and the returning is the compass confirming you chose right, because energy follows want, and the want freed generates where the borrowed goal only spent. Let go of the borrowed, not with a flourish but with a quiet redirection, and the redirection is the steer. A life built on reclaimed want is lighter than one built on performed ambition, because the reclaimed want is yours and the performed ambition was the room's, carried by you invisibly for years. Set it down. The room it opens is not a loss. It is the space where the life that fits begins to be built, one redirected hour at a time, by the person who finally stopped performing and started living, and the living, though quieter than the performing, is the real thing, and the real thing is the fit. Chapter 12. Resetting Priorities Without Guilt. Resetting priorities means some things move down and some move up, and the moving down always triggers guilt, because the things moving down were obligations, relationships, or goals you were taught to keep at the top, and moving them feels like betraying the good person you were trained to be. But the good person was often trained by the borrowed scale, and the scale, not the goodness, is what you are correcting, and correcting the scale is not betrayal. It is growing up. The guilt is loudest exactly where the priority was most borrowed, because the borrowed priority was held not by your want but by your fear of disappointing, and fear of disappointing is the engine of the drift. When you move that priority down, the fear screams that you are failing, and the scream is the habit, not truth. The truth is that a priority held only by fear was never truly yours, and releasing it from the top is not abandonment of good. It is placement of it where it belongs, which is lower than the want you have finally named, and the naming is the maturity the guilt is accusing you of lacking. Reset without apology and without cruelty. Apology implies the reset was wrong, it was not. Cruelty implies the move down things are worthless, they are not. They are simply not the top, and not the top is a legitimate place for a once dominant priority, especially an inherited or expired one. The reset is a reordering, not a rejection. The family expectation moves from dictator to guest, the borrowed milestone from master to option, the true want from whisper to compass. The order corrected is the fitted life, and the fitted life is not heartless. It is honest, and honesty is the deeper kindness, because a life lived for the borrowed scale helps no one, least of all the person performing it. Hold the reset with steadiness when the guilt arrives. The guilt here is the same security system we met in earlier work. It sounds when a boundary is set, and the sound is not evidence of wrong. Wait it out. The priority, once reset, will prove itself by the energy it returns and the fit it creates, and the proof, accumulated, retrains the habit that the reset was not failure but correction. Resetting priorities without guilt is not heartlessness. It is the refusal to let fear of disappointing run a life that was meant to be steered, and the steering, done with warmth and without apology, is the aligned life, where the top of the list is occupied by the want, and the rest find their honest places beneath it, and the places, though lower, are still held, just held by choice, which is the only way a priority can be carried without quietly costing the person carrying it. Chapter 13. Building a Life That Fits. Building the fitted life is not a demolition. It is a series of small adjustments made by someone who finally holds the rudder, because a life that fits is not created by burning the old one down. It is created by correcting the tilt, a nudge here, a release there, a defended hour, a reclaimed want, until the picture is straight and the heading is yours. The dramatic overhaul is a fantasy the drift sells, because the fantasy postpones the real work, which is small and daily and unglamorous. And unglamorous is exactly what the drifting person avoids by dreaming of the revolution. The building has a shape. First, acknowledge where you are, the honest look, the audit, the naming of the drift. Then locate the true priorities, the want beneath the noise, recovered in silence. Then inspect the actual use of time and energy, the two ledgers that reveal the gap. Then give up the borrowed goals, the release that returns the energy. Then nudge one thing toward fit, the smallest real move, defended, repeated. This is the aligned method in order, and the order is the build, because you cannot nudge toward a want you have not named, and you cannot name it under a life you have not audited, and the audit is the foundation of the build. The fitted life, once built in small moves, has a feeling. Not constant euphoria, that is the fantasy again, but a lack of friction, a sense that the days, though ordinary, are pointed the right way, and pointed right is the quiet that replaces the hum. The misaligned person mistakes the goal for a feeling. The aligned person knows the goal is a direction, and a direction held is steadier than any feeling, because feelings pass and directions persist, and a persisted direction is a life that fits, built not on the mood of the moment but on the compass of the want, and the compass, once trusted, makes the small moves obvious, because each move is simply, does this point toward the want? Build patiently. The drift took years, the alignment is a practice, not an event. But every nudge is a rudder move, and rudder moves repeated turn a drifting boat into a steered one, and a steered boat, though still subject to weather, is no longer at the mercy of current, and current was the drift. The fitted life is not a life without weather. It is a life with a rudder, and a rudder is the only thing that turns weather into a course, and a course is the only thing that makes a life yours. Build it in small moves. Defend the hour. Reclaim the want. Release the borrowed. And the building, though quiet, is the most real thing you will do, because it is the only building done by the person living in the life, and the living, finally on purpose, is the fit, and the fit is the peace beneath the noise, and the peace, though quiet, is the whole point of the audit. Chapter 14. The Aligned Method in Real Life. Here is the method gathered, the 5 moves you can hold like a phone number, retrievable exactly when the drift reappears. It is not a ritual. It is a sequence, repeatable, for the person who feels the familiar pull of the current and intends, this time, to check the heading first, because checking the heading is the only thing that turns a lifetime of drift into a life of steer. Acknowledge the drift. Name it honestly. Much of my life is happening to me, and I would struggle to say where it is going. The admission is not defeat. It is ownership, the first act of the steer. Locate your true priorities. Recover the want beneath the noise, the thing you would choose if no one watched. Silence the should, the comparison, the fear, and let the small voice surface. This want is the compass. I inspect the actual use of time. The ledger, where hours truly go versus what you claim to value. The gap, quantified, is the drift made visible, and visible is adjustable. Give up borrowed goals. Release the milestones you never chose gently by redirecting the energy they consumed toward the want. The release returns the energy, and the return confirms the choice. Nudge one thing toward fit. The smallest real move. 1 hour defended, 1 obligation released, 1 priority reset. Motion ends the drift because a nudge is a rudder move, and rudder moves repeated steer. A real application. The person who realizes their calendar serves everyone but them. Acknowledge, I have been drifting inside a full life. Locate, the want is unhurried evenings with my family, not the next badge. Inspect, the ledger shows 10 hours a week in meetings that could be 3. Give up the borrowed badge quietly by not applying. Nudge 1 defended evening a week, phone off present. The pattern is 1 act repeated. The drift reaches, a line meets it. You do not master it and finish. You use it clumsily, and the clumsiness is still alignment, which is the only thing that matters, because the life that ran itself is now, piece by piece, yours to steer, and the steering, bounded and present, is the fitted life, and it was always available, once you noticed the rudder was in your hand all along. Chapter 15. Small Changes That Hold. The danger after an audit is the grand plan, the sweeping reorganization that lasts a week and collapses under the old current, because the grand plan is powered by the mood of insight, and moods pass, and when they pass the plan has no structure to stand on. The changes that hold are small, defended, and repeated, because repetition is the only thing that builds a new current, and a new current, not a new mood, is what keeps a life aligned when the insight fades. Small is not trivial. A defended hour is a structure. A released expired obligation is a structure. A reset priority held past the guilt is a structure. Structures outlast moods because they do not depend on how you feel. They are appointments, boundaries, habits, and appointments survive the down days that kill the grand plans. The aligning person builds structures, not resolutions, because resolutions are promises to a motivated self who will not always be present, and structures are arrangements for the unmotivated self who will be, and the unmotivated self is the one who needs the rudder most. The practice is to pick one nudge and make it immovable, not five because five collapse into none. 1. The defended evening, the released obligation, the reclaimed walk. Make it a fixture, a recurring block, a stated boundary, a non-negotiable, and let it harden into the new current before adding another. The drift was built one unexamined yes at a time. The alignment is built one defended nudge at a time. And the symmetry is the point. Small moves, repeated, are how every life is made. And the only question is whether the moves are chosen or borrowed, and chosen small moves, held, become a steered life as surely as borrowed ones became a drifted one. Expect the old current to test the structure. The defended hour will be invaded by the urgent. The released obligation will be reasserted by guilt. The reset priority will be challenged by the borrowed scale. This is not failure. It is the current testing the new rudder, and the rudder holds not by being impregnable but by being reset each time it slips, because a rudder bumped back into place is still a rudder, and the bumping back, repeated, is the practice of steering. Small changes that hold are not the absence of struggle. They are the presence of a structure that survives the struggle, and the surviving structure is the fitted life, built not in a week of insight but in a year of small, defended, repeated nudges, by the person who finally stopped waiting for the mood and started building the course. Chapter 16. Staying aligned when life pulls. Life pulls. A crisis arrives, a demand expands, a season of caring for someone consumes the hours, and the current returns because alignment is not a permanent state you reach and keep. It is a direction you hold against a world that constantly offers you someone else's heading, and the holding is the practice, not the arrival, and the practice is the whole of the steer because the steer is not a destination. It is a posture maintained. The pull is not the enemy. The drift is the unexamined yes. The pull is the real demand, and real demands deserve real energy. The difference is consciousness. The aligned person meets the pull with a look. Is this a true claim on me, or is it the old current dressed as urgency? The true claim is met, held, and released when done. The old current is named and declined, or accepted only consciously. The look is the rudder, and the rudder, applied to the pull, is what keeps the life from sliding back into drift the moment the weather changes, because the sliding is automatic, and the looking is the only thing that interrupts it. The seasons of caring, the illness, the child, the parent, the lean year, are where alignment is tested hardest, because they justify the full surrender of the rudder, and sometimes the surrender is right and temporary. The danger is the temporary becoming permanent, the crisis becoming the identity, the caring becoming the drift. Hold the rudder even in the season. Defend one small thing that is yours, even if it is only the honest look, because the look preserves the self that the caring would otherwise consume, and a self preserved is a self that can return to steering when the season ends instead of discovering, years later, that the season became the life and the life drifted while no one was looking. Build the practice of the periodic check, not just the annual audit. A monthly 10 minutes. Where is my life pointing? The check is cheap insurance against the slow slide because the slide is slow and the check catches it while the correction is small, and small corrections are what keep a life aligned without upheaval. Staying aligned is not a heroic holding against. It is a mundane, repeated glance at the compass, a nudge when the point drifts, a defended nudge when the current pushes, and the glance, though ordinary, is the difference between a life that fits and a life that ran itself, because the running is silent and the glance is the only sound that interrupts it, and the interrupting, though quiet, is the whole of the steer, and the steer, held through the pulls, is the fitted life, weathered but yours. Chapter 17, The Quarterly Life Audit. The annual revelation is too late. By the time a year runs itself, the drift is entrenched and the correction is large, and large corrections feel like failures, which discourages the very practice that prevents them. The quarterly audit is the habit that keeps corrections small. 4 times a year, a defended half-day with the ledger's time, energy, relationships, obligations, and the honest question of where the life points now. Because now is when the nudge is cheap, and cheap nudges are what make the drastic ones unnecessary. The format is simple and repeatable. Block the time like a meeting with someone important because it is. Review the 4 ledgers lightly. Where did time actually go, and does it match the want? What gave and took energy, and is the ratio improving? Which relationships return me, which extract, and am I defending the first? What obligations are live, which expired, and have I released any? The answers, honest and unshamed, are the compass reading, and the reading, taken quarterly, is the early warning system the drift fears, because the drift thrives in the unexamined gap between readings, and the quarterly gap is too short for a life to run itself unnoticed. The audit is not a judgment. It is a reading, like checking a map, and a map reading is not a verdict on the traveler. You are not failing if the life has drifted since last quarter. You are simply off course, as all travelers are between readings, and the reading exists precisely to catch the off course while the correction is a nudge, not a rescue. The habit of the reading is the structure that outlasts the mood of any single insight, because the structure recurs whether you feel like it or not, and the recurring structure is what keeps a life steered through the seasons that would otherwise run it. Make the quarterly audit a fixture, defended like the defended hour but larger, and let it become as normal as a dental check, preventive, unglamorous, quietly essential. The person who audits quarterly rarely needs the dramatic overhaul, because the overhaul is what happens when the small readings are skipped, and skipping is the drift's favorite strategy, because the drift knows that an unaudited life will, given a year, run itself, and the running is the drift. The quarterly reading interrupts the running with a glance, and the glance, 4 times a year, is the cheapest insurance a life can buy, and the buying is the practice of steering, and the steering, made routine, is the fitted life, maintained not achieved, and maintenance is the only kind of alignment that lasts, because achievement is a moment and maintenance is a life, and a life is what we are building, one quarterly glance at a time. Chapter 18, Becoming the Person Who Steers. The audit, the method, the quarterly glance, these are tools, and tools do not steer. A person does. The real work of this book is not the technique but the identity shift from passenger to steerer, because a passenger with a rudder still drifts if they will not take the rudder, and taking it is not a technique. It is a decision, repeated, to be the one holding it, even when holding it is inconvenient, unglamorous, and opposed by the old current that preferred a passenger. The shift is quiet. You stop saying life happened to me and start saying I pointed it there, even for the small things, because the small things are where the identity is built. The defended hour is not just an hour. It is a vote for the steerer. The released obligation is not just relief. It is a claim that you decide what you carry. The reset priority is not just a reorder. It is the person at the helm, choosing the top of the list, and the choosing, repeated, becomes the self. And the self, once a steerer, no longer drifts by default, because a steerer notices the current and corrects, and the noticing and correcting is the whole of the aligned life, and the life steered is the one that fits. The old identity resists, because the old identity was built on being good, useful, accommodating, and the steerer can look to that identity like a selfish departure. But the steerer is not selfish. The steerer is simply present, and presence is what lets the good actually land, because a person who is there by choice gives better than a person who is there by default, and the giving chosen is the warmer thing, not the colder. The shift from passenger to steerer is not a loss of care. It is the recovery of it, because care given from a steered life is given by a whole person, not performed by a drifting one. And the whole person is what the people you love actually wanted all along, underneath the drift. Become the steerer slowly by the small votes, defended and repeated, until the identity is no longer the person who gets carried, but the person who holds the rudder. And the rudder held makes the drift impossible by default, because a held rudder is a correction before the slide, and a correction before the slide is a life that fits without drama. You were never unable to steer. You were unpracticed, and unpracticed is not unable, and practice is the only thing that turns unable into steerer. And the practice is the defended nudge, the quarterly glance, the honest look, the reclaimed want, small, repeated, and yours. Become the person who steers, not by a leap but by 1,000 small takes of the rudder. And the taking, though quiet, is the most real thing you will do, because it is the only taking done by the person living the life. And the living, finally on purpose, is the fit, and the fit is the peace. And the peace, though quiet, was the whole point of the audit, and the audit was only ever the glance that let you take the rudder, which was in your hand all along. The time ledger deeper. The time ledger is the simplest audit and the most revealing, because everyone lies about their time until they write it down. The lie is not deliberate. It is the gap between the story of the week and the ledger of it. The story says family first. The ledger shows inbox first. The story says health matters. The ledger shows it canceled. The story says the life is full of what counts. The ledger shows it full of what interrupted. Writing the ledger is the first honest look, and honesty is what the drift has been avoiding. Keep the ledger for 1 week in half-hour blocks, noting not the plan but the actuality. The scroll counts. The dread commute counts. The numb evening counts. Then write your stated priorities beside it and hold the two up. The distance is not a verdict. It is data, the drift, quantified, and data is adjustable where a feeling of wrongness is not, because a feeling is vague and endless and a ledger is specific and fixable. The ledger says, 11 hours this week in the numb, and the 11 is a thing you can move, where the feeling was only a hum you could not locate. The move is small and real, not a reinvention of the schedule, a nudge. One of the 11 hours moved to the value, the walk, the family, the work that absorbs. The nudge, defended like a meeting, is the rudder move because it is a choice about where the life goes, made by the person living it, and one chosen hour is the crack in the drift. The ledger, run quarterly, catches the slide before it becomes a year, because the quarterly gap is too short for a life to run itself unnoticed, and the unnoticed running is the drift, and the running, interrupted by the ledger, is the steer, and the steer, though quiet, is the whole of the alignment, and the alignment is the fitted life, built not on the mood of insight but on the recurring honesty of the ledger, which is the cheapest rudder a life can buy. The energy map deeper. The energy map is the second ledger and the more honest one, because energy does not lie about fit the way time does. You can spend an hour on obligation and call it duty. You cannot spend an hour and fake the drain. Energy is spent only where something in you responds, and the response, lit or drained, is the truest signal of fit you have, because it bypasses the story and reports the body's verdict on the life. And the verdict, though uncomfortable, is the compass the drift has been overriding. Map the week by energy. After each significant block, note, gave or took, the conversation that left you lit, the meeting that left you empty, the task that absorbed, the task that was a wall, the person who returned you, the person who extracted you. The pattern seen is the map of the fit, and the map is usually upside down from the story, the takers funded, the givers starved, Because the drift overfunds the obligations and underfunds the returns, and the overfunding is the exhaustion, and the exhaustion is the misalignment the vacation could not fix, because the vacation rested the body and left the map unchanged, and the unchanged map reasserts the drain the moment the luggage is unpacked. Rebalance by defending one giver and starving one taker this week concretely. The friend who returns you a defended hour. The meeting that could be skipped. The person whose company cost you yourself loosened a notch. The moves are not dramatic. They are the rudder applied to the energy current, and the current redirected turns a life that spends into a life that generates, and a generating life is, by definition, a life that fits, because fit is not comfort. Fit is the right energy moving in the right direction, and direction chosen by you is the alignment. And alignment is the quiet that replaces the hum, which was the whole point of the audit. And the audit was only ever the map that let you see which way the energy ran, and the seeing is the steer. The priority card. The priority card is the tool that makes the want portable, because an audit done once and forgotten is an insight that fades, and a faded insight is a drift resumed. Write on a single card the 3 things that actually fit you, recovered from the noise, specific yours. Not family in the vague sense, but the unhurried evening present, phone off. Not health in the abstract, but the walk that absorbs. Not work in the impressive sense, but the task that makes the hour vanish. The card is the compass carried, and the carrying is what keeps the want in view when the borrowed scale gets loud. Consult the card at the small moments of choice, the yes to the extra meeting, the no to the walk, the accept of the obligation. Hold the choice to the card. Does this point toward the 3 or away? The question asked in the moment is the rudder applied at speed, because the drift reaches for the yes in a second and the card, if carried, meets it in the next. The card is not a rule. It is a reminder of the compass, and a reminded person steers where a forgetting person drifts, and the steering in 1,000 small moments is the fitted life, because the life is nothing but the sum of its small moments, and the moments, chosen by the compass, add up to a direction, and a direction is a life that fits. Make the card physical. A note in the wallet, a line in the phone, a sentence on the mirror. The physicality matters because the drift is physical. It lives in the habits of the body, the automatic yes, the reflexive accommodation, and a physical compass meets a physical habit on its own ground. The card seen daily is the small vote for the steerer, and the vote repeated becomes the identity. And the identity, once a steerer, no longer drifts by default, because a steerer notices the current and corrects, and the noticing and correcting is the whole of the aligned life. And the life steered is the one that fits, built not on the mood of insight but on the daily glance at the card, which is the cheapest and most constant rudder a life can hold, and the holding, though quiet, is the most real thing you will do, because it is the only holding done by the person living the life. The release list. The release list is the practical close of the obligation audit, the written account of what you are setting down because it is expired, inherited, or borrowed, and the writing is what makes the release real, because an intention unwritten is a drift resumed, and the drift resumes by default unless the release is named. List the 3 things you will stop funding this quarter. The expired obligation, the inherited expectation, the borrowed goal, each named, each with the energy it returns, each with the date you stop. The list is not a manifesto of abandonment. It is a ledger of honesty. These were real once, or were given in love, or were admired by others, and none of that makes them live now, and live is the only criterion a steerer uses, because a life is built of live weight, and dead weight, however honored in origin, is still dead, and dead weight is the exhaustion. The release list sets the dead down gently, with thanks where thanks are due, and the setting down is not ingratitude. It is the maturity of knowing that a commitment's truth ended when its need ended, and carrying past the end is not virtue. It is clutter, and clutter in the obligation ledger is what keeps you too full to hold the live things that fit. Review the list quarterly as the audit recurs, and notice what returned despite the release, the drift reasserting, the borrowed goal creeping back, the expired obligation reasserted by guilt. The return is not failure. It is the current testing the new rudder, and the rudder holds not by being impregnable but by being reset each time it slips, because a rudder bumped back into place is still a rudder, and the bumping back, repeated, is the practice of steering. The release list reviewed is the structure that outlasts the mood of any single letting go, because the structure recurs whether you feel like it or not, and the recurring structure is what keeps a life aligned through the seasons that would otherwise run it. And the running, interrupted by the list, is the steer, and the steer made routine is the fitted life, maintained not achieved, and maintenance is the only kind of alignment that lasts. More real moments, more drift. Further original scenes, because the method lives in the specific, and the specific is where recognition arrives. The promotion that was never theirs. A person climbs toward a title everyone admires and arrives exhausted and oddly empty because the title was the culture's, not theirs, and the climbing, though praised, was the drift wearing the clothes of ambition. The audit locates the want beneath, not the title but the work that absorbs. The borrowed goal is released quietly by not applying for the next rung. The energy returns, redirected to the absorbing work, and the returning is the compass confirming the choice. The person is not less. They are more themselves, and the self, recovered from the borrowed scale, is the fit. And the fit is the piece the title never delivered, because the title was the room's and the piece is theirs, and theirs is the only kind that fits. The calendar that served everyone else. Someone's week is a gift to everyone but them. Meetings, favors, the open door, the always available. The time ledger reveals 10 hours a week in the service of others' urgencies and 0 in the service of their own want. The nudge. One defended evening, phone off, present with the family they claim to prioritize. The defended hour held past the guilt becomes a fixture, and the fixture is the rudder, and the rudder held turns the calendar from a gift to others into a life that includes them. And the them included is the fit, because the fit was never the absence of others. It was the presence of self, and the self, defended for 1 hour, is the steerer, and the steerer's calendar serves the want, not just the room. The relationship that extracted. A person keeps company with someone who leaves them smaller and calls the smallness loyalty, because the relationship is old and the extraction is slow, and the drift has normalized it. The audit of relationship sorts it. This one takes more than it gives, and the taking has become identity. The loosening is not a cut but a notch, less availability, more boundary. The returning friend defended instead. The extraction, starved a little, shrinks, and the self, no longer extracted, returns, and the return is the fit, because the fit was always the presence of self, and the self, returned by the boundary, is the steerer, and the steerer's relationships fit, because they are chosen by the compass, not inherited by the drift. The obligation that outlived its use. Someone carries a standing yes to a role whose need ended years ago, a committee, a care, a promise to a person who no longer requires it. The obligation audit marks it expired. The release, gently, returns the hours, and the hours, redirected to the live things, are the fit, because the fit was never the dead weight. It was the live, and the live, funded by the released hours, generates where the dead only spent, and the spending was the exhaustion, and the exhaustion was the misalignment the vacation could not fix, because the vacation rested the body and left the ledger unchanged, and the unchanged ledger reasserted the dead weight. And the dead weight, set down, is the room where the fitted life begins. The season that became the life. A person enters a season of caring and illness, a child, a parent, and surrenders the rudder entirely, and the season, though right and temporary, becomes the identity, and the identity becomes the life, and the life drifts while no one looks. The audit quarterly catches it. The season ended, the surrender did not. The nudge. Defend one small thing that is theirs, even in the caring. The defended thing preserves the self, and the self-preserved is the self that can return to steering when the season ends, instead of discovering that the season became the drift. And the drift, caught early, is a nudge, not a rescue, and the nudge is the steer. And the steer, even in the season, is the fitted life, weathered but theirs, and theirs is the only kind that fits. The long view of a steered life. If you could see the steered life a year on, you would notice what the daily view hides. The rudder is in hand more often than not. The quarterly audits caught the slides. The priority card met the small moments. The release list set the dead down. The defended hours became fixtures. And the fixtures repeated became the default, because defaults are what the brain reaches for, and you train the right one. The drift did not vanish. It was caught early by a person who holds the rudder, and the holding is the peace. And the peace is not the absence of pull. It is the presence of steer. The year is made of small votes, not a single rise. The person who starts this work wanting a perfect life gets instead a life with a rudder, a life that points at the want, corrected when it slips, defended when the current pushes. And the pointing held is steadier than any feeling, because feelings pass and directions persist. And a persisted direction is a life that fits, built not on the mood of insight but on the practice of the glance. And the glance, 4 times a year and 1,000 times in the small moments, is the only thing that turns a lifetime of drift into a life of steer. And the steer is the fit, and the fit is the quiet that replaces the hum. Be in no hurry. The drift was installed over decades and will not retire in a week. But every nudge taken with consciousness is a tiny promotion of the steerer and a tiny demotion of the passenger. And the promotions repeated become the identity, and the identity, once a steerer, no longer drifts by default, because a steerer notices the current and corrects, and the noticing and correcting is the whole of the aligned life, and the life steered is the one that fits. You are never unable to steer. You are unpracticed, and unpracticed is not unable, and practice is the only thing that turns unable into steerer, and the practice is the defended nudge, the quarterly glance, the honest ledger, the reclaimed want, small, repeated, and yours. The fitted life is not a destination reached. It is a direction held, and a direction held is a life that fits, and a life that fits is the only life that was ever yours to live, and the living, finally on purpose, is the peace, and the peace, though quiet, was the whole point of the audit. A note on when to seek help. This audiobook is a practical companion for living more deliberately, written by someone who believes ordinary people can steer their own lives. It is not treatment for the heavier whether that drift can sit beside persistent low mood that does not lift, anxiety or numbness that restricts life, the inability to function, or a life where the misalignment is tangled with real depression, trauma, or harm. Those deserve care from people trained to give it, and reaching for that care is not a failure of the method or a sign you did the audit wrong. It is the correct first move, because the method is a support, not a substitute, and knowing the difference is itself an act of alignment. The same honest look applied to the heaviest load. Is this mine to steer alone, or is this a moment to get help? A rough guide. If the wrongness is accompanied by hopelessness, the inability to get out of bed, panic, or thoughts of not continuing, please talk to a professional. Using the align method to avoid that care is not alignment. Using it alongside that care is. Many capable people move through the heavier weather and find real relief with the right support, and reaching out is not the opposite of steering. Often it is the first real act of it, because the steerer is the one who faces the truth of where they are, and the truth faced sometimes includes the need for help, and the need met is the rudder applied to the heaviest current, and the current met with support is survivable, and survivable is the condition of the steer, and the steer supported is the fitted life, weathered but yours, and yours is the only kind that fits, and the fitting, though it may require help, is the whole point of the audit. And the audit was only ever the honest glance that let you see where you are, and the seeing is the beginning of the steer, whether the steer is taken alone or with the help that makes it possible. The align method, WALKD through. A single life, walked through all 5 moves, to show the method as one continuous act rather than 5 separate ones. A person realizes their week is full, but their life is not theirs. The calendar serves everyone, the evenings numb, the want buried under the noise. Acknowledge the honest sentence. Much of my life is happening to me, and I would struggle to say where it is going. Not defeat ownership, the first act of the steer. The admission ends the story that the full calendar is the life, because the full calendar is the drift, and naming it is the rudder taken. Locate the want beneath the noise, recovered in silence, not the next badge but the unhurried evening, present with the family, phone off. The should voice, the comparison, the fear, silenced for an hour, let the small voice surface. And the surfacing is the compass, because the compass was always there, drowned by the noise the drift used to avoid the question. Inspect the time ledger for a week, 10 hours in others' urgencies, 0 in the want. The gap quantified is the drift made visible, and visible is adjustable, where the feeling of wrongness was only a hum. The ledger says 11 hours in the numb, and the 11 is a thing to move, not a verdict to endure. Give up the borrowed badge, released quietly by not applying for the next rung. The energy it consumed returns, redirected to the absorbing work, and the returning is the compass confirming the choice, because energy follows want, and the want freed generates where the borrowed goal only spent. Nudge, one defended evening a week, phone off, present. The smallest real move defended like a meeting, held past the guilt. Motion ends the drift because a nudge is a rudder move, and rudder moves repeated steer. The pattern is one act repeated. The drift reaches, a line meets it. You do not master it and finish. You use it clumsily, and the clumsiness is still alignment, which is the only thing that matters, because the life that ran itself is now, piece by piece, yours to steer, and the steering, bounded and present, is the fitted life, and it was always available, once you noticed the rudder was in your hand all along. What nobody tells you about alignment. When the life fits, people expect to feel elated, and are surprised to find they feel calm, not a high, but a lack of friction, a sense that the days, though ordinary, are pointed the right way. The surprise is the trap. They think the method failed because the calm felt plain, when the calm was never the goal. The goal was the direction, and a direction held is steadier than any feeling, because feelings pass and directions persist, and a persisted direction is a life that fits, built not on the mood of insight but on the compass of the want. Also, the borrowed scale people may resist the change. The ones who admired the milestone, who leaned on your climbing, who measured you by the scale you never chose, they will question the step back, and their questioning is the borrowed life protecting itself through them. Hold the release with warmth. You are not rejecting them. You are reclaiming you, and the reclaiming, though it disappoints the borrowed scale people, is the only move that fits, and the fit, once felt, makes the disappointment survivable. Because a life that fits is worth more than the approval of people measuring you by a scale you never chose, and the measuring declined is the steer. And the steered life may look ordinary from the outside. No fireworks, just a person who defends an hour, releases a dead weight, resets a priority, consults the card, while the current, though present, is met by a rudder. The ordinary steered life is not a headline. It is a Tuesday where the rudder is in hand, and Tuesdays accumulated are a life, and a life steered is the only kind that fits, because fit is not the absence of weather. Fit is the presence of direction chosen by you, and direction chosen turns even weather into a course, and a course is a life, and a life you steer is the only life that was ever yours to live. The method in the end is not a transformation. It is a correction of who holds the rudder. You were always the steerer by capacity. You are now the steerer by practice, and the practice repeated becomes the life, and the life, fitted and quiet, is the one you wanted, not the full one the drift was keeping you in. The drift was never yours. Take the rudder. The life that fits is the one you steer, and the steering, though quiet, is the most real thing you will do, because it is the only steering done by the person living the life. The rudder was always yours. Return at the end to the image the book closes on. The drift was never a force outside you. It was a rudder you stopped holding, and the stopping was understandable, the momentum, the accommodation, the avoidance, the busyness that hid the question, but the stopping was a choice made by default, and a default is a choice, and a choice can be unmade. The rudder was always in your hand. You were not a passenger because you could not steer. You were a passenger because you did not look down to see the rudder was there, and not looking was the drift, and the drift, though comfortable, was never freedom. Notice the relief in that. You are not broken, only unpracticed, and unpracticed is not unable, and practice is the only thing that turns unable into steerer, and the practice is the defended nudge, the quarterly glance, the honest ledger, the reclaimed want small, repeated, and yours. The borrowed goals, the expired obligations, the priorities held by fear, the noise of should, these were the drift, and they were never the life, and setting them down is not abandonment of the good. It is the recovery of it, because the good you actually value, now at the top of the list, generates the energy the borrowed scale was spending, and the generating is the fit, and the fit is the peace. So the rudder was always yours. Take it. Acknowledge where you are. Locate the want. Inspect the actual use of time and energy. Give up the borrowed. Nudge one thing toward fit. The 5 moves are not a ritual. They are the hand closing around the rudder that was already there, and the closing, though quiet, is the most real thing you will do, because it is the only closing done by the person living the life. The drift will test the hold, the current, the borrowed scale, the guilt, the season, and the testing is not failure. It is the weather, and weather is met by a rudder, and a rudder is the only thing that turns weather into a course, and a course is a life, and a life you steer is the only life that fits, and a life that fits is the peace beneath the noise, and the peace, though quiet, was the whole point of the audit, and the audit was only ever the glance that let you see the rudder was in your hand all along. A closing invitation. You began this audiobook with the year that ran itself, the full calendar, the low hum of wrongness, the picture tilted a degree at a time. You are still capable of that drift. The difference now is not that the drift is gone. It is that you know a method, and a method, used clumsily, still aligns, while the unexamined habit only drifts, and drifting by habit was the whole of the life that ran itself. The aligned method is offered free, because it costs nothing but the small motion of using it. Acknowledge the drift. Locate your true priorities. Inspect the actual use of time. Give up borrowed goals. Nudge one thing toward fit. 5 moves, repeatable, yours to use the next time the current reaches for you, because it will reach as currents do, and reaching is not the problem, obeying is. You steer with the drift present. That is what alignment looks like here. Not a life without current, but a life with a rudder, and a rudder is the only thing that turns current into a course, and a course is the fitted life, and the fitted life is the only one that was ever yours to live. You do not need a perfect life. You need a steered one. The crises still come, the demands still expand, the seasons still consume, but the rudder means they are met, not merely endured, and met consciously is the difference between a life that fits and a life that runs itself. The want beneath the noise is the compass, and the compass, carried on the priority card and consulted in the small moments, makes the nudges obvious because each nudge is simply, does this point toward the want? The drift was never yours to keep. The rudder was always yours to take. Take it. Acknowledge, locate, inspect, give up, nudge, and the nudging, though quiet, is the most real thing you will do because it is the only nudging done by the person living the life. The life that fits is not a destination reached. It is a direction held, and a direction held is a life that is yours, and a life that is yours is the only kind that fits, and the fitting, though quiet, is the peace you were looking for when you started this audit, and the audit was only ever the glance that let you take the rudder, which was in your hand all along. Final chapter, The Life That Fits. We return to the opening, the year that ran itself, the full calendar, the low hum of wrongness. The picture tilted a degree at a time until it was obviously crooked and you could not name when it moved. If you have done the work of these chapters, The picture is not perfectly straight, and it never will be, because life pulls and the pull is constant, and constant pull means constant correction, and correction is not failure. It is steering, and steering is the only thing a fitted life requires, because a fitted life is not a static achievement. It is a direction held. The life that fits is not a life without weather. It is a life with a rudder. The crises still come, the demands still expand, the seasons of caring still consume the hours. But the rudder means they are met, not merely endured, and met consciously is the difference between a life that fits and a life that runs itself, because the running is silent, and the rudder is the only sound that interrupts it. You will not arrive at a place where the drift stops. You will arrive at a practice where the drift is caught early by a person who holds the rudder, and the holding is the peace, and the peace is not the absence of pull. It is the presence of steer. What you no longer need to carry. The borrowed goals that were never yours, the expired obligations that outlived their use, the priorities held only by fear of disappointing, the noise of should and comparison and fear that drowned the small voice. These were the drift, and they were never the life. Setting them down is not abandonment of the good. It is the recovery of it, the good you actually value, now at the top of the list, held by choice, generating the energy the borrowed scale was spending. The fitted life is not smaller. It is clearer, and clarity is what lets the good be good, because a good you chose is a good that fits, and a good that fits is a good you can sustain, and sustain is the only kind of good that becomes a life. The method stays with you as a habit you are building, acknowledge, locate, inspect, give up, nudge, and the habit repeated becomes the default, because defaults are what the brain reaches for and you are training the right one. The drift will reach for the current again, it always does. But you will catch it sooner, name it, run the audit, and nudge back to the want, and the want, held as compass, makes the nudges obvious. You do not need a perfect life. You need a steered one, and a steered one, though weathered, is yours, and yours is the only kind that fits, because fit is not the absence of trouble. Fit is the presence of direction, chosen by you, and direction chosen turns even trouble into a course, and a course is a life, and a life you steer is the only life that was ever yours to live. Take the rudder. It was in your hand all along.